to beyoungministry.blogspot.com. Also to another podcast out of the letter written by Paul to the churches in the province of Galatia. Today we're in Galatians chapter 1, verses 15 through 17, which reads, "But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus." Again, that's Galatians 1, verses 15 through 17. God's desire to tell us about himself is quite revealing. It is striking that he speaks to us directly. The humility displayed speaks of his completeness or his holiness, for he is lacking nothing. We should not be surprised that the Supreme Being is not proud, arrogant, and demanding of his subjects. Such is the nature of humility. Perhaps humility is the greatest display of strength known to man, along with meekness. The Apostle Paul underscores the fact that God called him by his grace. I was thinking about that. What is it? Is grace kind of like a megaphone or a microphone? The structure of the sentence is such that it is by the grace of God one is called. Grace is the means by which God calls us. Well, we must entertain the question, what is it about grace that couches the call of God in our lives best? Grace is not threatening, it's gentlemanlike. Grace is inviting. Grace is risky, and it is unfair. Grace says, I love the bad, not just the good. Grace has been known to be well known in the slums. Blessed are the poor, said Jesus. Blessed are the desperate, is one way of interpreting that first beatitude out of Matthew chapter 5 and verse 3. Unless we face our own failings and weaknesses and desperations, we may never receive that gift, that precious gift of grace. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 16, we discover why the grace of God calls us, in order to reveal his Son, not to us, but in us. Think about it. God called you by his grace in order to reveal his Son in you. Think about it. The usage of the word in is very instructive. Paul did not write to, he wrote in. The Son was unveiled directly in Paul. God, the Son, is unveiled directly in you and me. The Son was unveiled directly to Paul so that Paul would have the most intimate understanding of him. And my friends, the same is true for you. Same is true for me. My friend Dan Veldman likes to say, intimacy is feeling without touching. God uses the word in here to communicate intimacy. Intimacy, as underscored in the middle of verse 16, is essential for the authentic reception and delivery of the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Notice the words in the middle of verse 16, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. It's interesting. God nestled up to Paul God is nuzzling up to you and me so that we could deliver his message of grace to those everywhere, including those in the slums. Implied here is those with the most authentic and intimate relationship with the Lord are those who deliver the gospel to the helpless best. The obvious question here is, how do we get the most intimate and authentic relationship with the Lord? It just doesn't happen because he's in us. There are plenty of people who God indwells, who are believers in Christ and therefore are born again to God. God has awakened them by his Spirit, and yet they don't have intimacy with God. And they don't have they don't have authenticity in their delivery of the message. Look at what God did for Paul at the end of verse 16 and into verse 17. He wrote, "My immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus." I went into Arabia, he says. Now in that day, going into Arabia was not the same as it is today. A lot has changed. God separated Paul to himself for 3 years. In verse 18, in this very same chapter, we see that it was a 3-year period of time. And it was during this time that Christ revealed himself, not just to Paul, but in Paul, in an intimate way. I would imagine that, humanly speaking, this was a difficult time for Paul. However, his effectiveness in receiving the message and the development of his ministry largely depended upon it. It was through this 3-year trial that God gave to Paul his heart, God's heart to Paul, for him and for others. You see, my friend, most often we lack depth with God and with others because we do not embrace God's purposes through our sufferings and our trials. We would rather run from them rather than embrace him through them. And we would also like to find a scapegoat for why our lives have gone south. And we've been known to complain. Complaining is one of the loudest expressions of feeding the flesh in anyone's life. We should stay away from it because it shortcuts intimacy with God and effectiveness in ministry toward others. If we're going to be intimate with God and authentic to those we want to help, we must embrace our trials and sufferings. But we must not end just at the trials and the sufferings. We must embrace God through these two unwanted allies. It is hard, but when we evaluate it in the context of eternity, it's doable. My friend, I hope these podcasts have been helpful to you in your walk with the Lord, these blogs. Should I be of any assistance to you, feel free to shoot me an email at beyoungministry@gmail.com. Hey, I trust you have a great day.